Jags Dolphins. We already got some Jags love in the chat here.
Whew.
People talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars. I feel like they're a very polarizing team. So this is
they're gonna like what I have to say then.
We're well, it's in the notes. We got the full screens for it, so got to say it with confidence here. Jags are traveling to Miami, down to Miami, a Florida in-state matchup here. This one's another 1:00 game, so could be a hot one. Not that the Jags aren't used to it, but what's the matchup that matters here for these two Florida teams going head-to-head?
I mean, it's Tyreek Hill and I guess Ronald Darby. You lost Darius Williams. You lost Trey Herndon.
You got Tyson Campbell to guard sometimes,
When you consider that Tyreek Hill is Tyreek Hill and had 83 catches last year that resulted in a first down.
It's tough.
Only player with 1,700 receiving yards in 2 seasons.
Yeah.
26 missed tackles forced, which is first among wide receivers. I mean, this is a really tall order, and I'm very, very nervous for either of these guys to go up against Tyreek Hill, as I would be. This is just kind of a ubiquitous matchup to watch when anybody's playing the Dolphins. It's who the hell is covering Tyreek Hill?
Yeah.
And how are you covering Tyreek Hill? Because you need that safety help over top. You need someone to kind of put a lid on him as much as possible, as impossible as that is. So
yeah.
that's my
when you play Tyreek Hill and honestly Jalen Waddle in there as well, right? You could even expand this matchup to just be okay if you want to. I think Jags fans would say like, no, we got Tyson Campbell. It's like, all right, well they also have Jalen Waddle. I think there's a lot of things that you have to think about here, and it will come down to Ronald Darby one way or another, like whether he's guarding Tyreek Hill, whether he's guarding Jalen Waddle. So I completely agree with you, especially because with that speed, you basically you have to play too high at the very least. Like you have to play the safeties over the top. I completely agree with you. The one way that I think you do slow down Miami is you get interior pressure on this team.
Yeah.
Because if there's one way to really rattle Tua, it's getting that interior pressure and forcing him off of his spot and forcing him to move and accelerating when he has to get rid of the football, not as on script as he would like to be. Not that he can't do that, but when you win up front in the middle as a defensive line, it is so impactful because the distance between you and the ball is the smallest.
It's the smallest, yes. So that all the time.
The Jags defensive tackles versus Miami's interior offensive line, I think is a big one. Because if you look at Miami's interior offensive line last year's grades, and then with this year's team, because Aaron Brewer is the new center on this team, which I think was a good signing from them, especially being able to move Eichenberg, who was not good at center. Brewer earned a 73.1 blocking grade last year with the Titans. Eichenberg, though, I mentioned with him being a center, 47.5, not good. And then Robert Jones is the other guard, 62.7, which is better, but not great.
Not great.
The Jags go out and they get Arik Armstead from the San Francisco 49ers. He's a big player in this, in my opinion, because if he can really give one of those three guys fits on a regular basis, that's actually how you slow down this Miami offense. It's not, all right, well, we're going to have one guy guard Tyreek Hill because then you're screwed. There's no way it's going to happen. He's too good.
He can't. Prevent the ball from even getting there. That's
right. The way that you neutralize it is you got to be able to win up front. And I actually think the Jags have a player in Arik Armstead to be able to do it. So are there a couple of game-breaking plays that Arik Armstead's able to win and get home? I think that will be an important factor here. Armstead, 85.1 pass rush grade last year. So we know that he knows how to do it, and his big size and length is a mismatch against those interior offensive linemen anyways. But what about a plus factor here in this game? What do you got?
I'm going with another LSU wide receiver from going back a couple of topics now. It's got to be Brian Thomas Jr. because this is much needed in Jacksonville for Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence at present does not have a true number one receiver. I don't care what you say about Christian Kirk. You got Gabe Davis. That's great. He's a great number two. Both of those guys had 700 something yards last year. Gabe Davis was a little more productive when it comes to touchdowns. He had 7 touchdowns last year, as opposed to Christian Kirk, who only had 3. You're going to need Brian Thomas Jr. You're going to need BTJ to step up and be that number one wide receiver that you hoped Calvin Ridley was going to be, that wasn't. I think he could be huge for Trevor Lawrence. Again, LSU has just kind of become wide receiver U at this point. So I have a lot of faith in BTJ, and I talked to some of the guys over in Tampa after they had those joint practices against the Jags, and the coaches all of them praised BTJ and what they saw from him. They were like, this guy is going to be really good.
Yeah.
And to see that in joint practices and in his rookie season, I think it just bodes very, very well. And again, you're going up against a Miami secondary, which I really like, but I like it kind of more from the safety spot too. Like Javon Holland is just one of my favorite players. But he's not going to be specifically assigned to Brian Thomas Jr., although we'll see what happens where they play him. It's going to be really interesting to me though. And I think that if the Jags are going to have a hope of beating the Dolphins, it's going to have a lot to do with BTJ.
Yeah. Some people in the chat saying that the Miami Dolphins could have had Graham Barton. Those in Tampa, salute them for not doing that. But that could have been something that really could have helped. Again, I
was shocked that they didn't invest more in their offensive line, given how hurt they get.
The Chop Robinson pick feels like a Miami pick because he's a super athlete. And, with Jalen Phillips coming back from season-ending injury, and obviously Bradley Chubb suffering a season-ending injury as well, like I sort of get it, but I felt like offensive line would have been more of the priority, even with them signing Brewer. So we'll see if that was enough, and we'll be able to sort of get a hint on that. But the Brian Thomas Jr. point, I did want to expand upon that because something that I looked up after the draft, because I like the Brian Thomas Jr. pick from the Jags. And as I went to sort of research and support me liking this pick, I found that I actually like it more than I even thought that I would have going into it. Because when you look at the Jags last year, they were top 10 in the league in big time throws, throwing attempts, completion percentage, and yards, I believe, when throwing 20 or more yards down the field. Mm-hmm. This is what they want to do. They want to be a vertical passing attack. And how Miami tries to neutralize that with a great veteran corner in Jalen Ramsey, but then another all-star secondary player in Javon Holland as their deep safety as well. That's going to be fascinating to me because that is what Jacksonville wants to do. And we might be in for a fireworks show between these two teams in week one. This could be one of the highest scoring games of the entire week. My plus factor is Devin Lloyd, the linebacker from Jacksonville. And the reason why is because Miami ran the fourth amount of play action plays last season and had the second highest passing grade when throwing off of play action last year, an elite 92.3. It's something that Mike McDaniel does often, and it's something that he does well. When you have the linebackers that can recognize sort of the hints of when it's going to be a play action and not have as many of those false steps or move one way or the other, that can really help. You can defend the middle of the field a lot better. You can occupy space. You can get into throwing lanes. And I think that Devin Lloyd is the caliber of player to do that. People are talking about a guy who is poised for a second-year standout season. I believe that could be the case for him. I liked him a lot out of Utah, especially his coverage ability. And I think that his play, and if we see sort of that uptick in anticipation from him this year, that'll be something that, again, allows Jacksonville to hopefully mitigate what Miami wants to do well. So I think that is a plus factor there that you got to watch out for. If Devin Lloyd's on his P's and Q's, it might mean a lot more to some of those no throws that don't show up in the stat sheet that you kind of got to watch the film to appreciate. So I'm going to look forward to going back to this one.